Donna Macho was a 19-year-old legal secretary and part-time model who resided with her parents on Cherrybrook Lane in East Windsor, New Jersey. As her picturesque address indicated, she was living the all-American dream. Described as beautiful and popular in high school and thriving after graduation. Those close to Donna say she was determined to turn her part-time job as a model into a full-time career. On February 26, 1984, Donna was watching television in her basement when her younger sister showed up. The sisters watched a scary movie until 2 a.m. Her sister decided to retire to bed around 2:45 a.m., but Donna stayed up to watch more TV. Their mother and stepfather were peacefully sleeping upstairs. This would be the last time Donna was ever seen alive. Her sister recalls she did not hear any commotion nor strange noises from the basement that night. Despite it being a Sunday, Donna had told her family she had plans to go into her office to catch up on work. As such, nobody was even aware Donna was missing until later that evening. When Donna failed to return for dinner, her mother went downstairs to check on her. Once inside, she noticed that things had been scattered around, which was unusual for Donna's meticulously organized room. Her mother says this indicated that there may have been some kind of struggle. Upon closer inspection, Donna's mother discovered a pile of clothes stained with blood. Upon seeing the blood, the worry which had been bubbling inside Donna's mother boiled over into full-blown panic, and she called police. Following a search, the authorities discovered Donna's black 1979 Chrysler parked on the side of Millstone Road, near the border of Cranbury. Inside the car, police discovered Donna's brown leather pocketbook on the seat, with its contents, including cash, credit cards, and driver's license, still present. All 4 doors of the car were unlocked. Police also found stains on the upholstery and the ceiling of the automobile. Later, it was confirmed that the blood present on the automobile was that of the missing 19-year-old. Additionally, DNA evidence was found inside the apartment. However, as back in 1984 DNA technology was still in its infancy, no matches to any suspects could be found. Despite the plethora of bodily fluids found in the automobile, police had no leads, and the case would eventually go cold. Then, in April of 1995, over a decade since Donna had gone missing, a Boy Scout troop leader discovered a partially clothed skeleton while foraging in the area. The skeleton, wrapped in a carpet, was placed in the dense underbrush just off of George Davidson Road, not far from where Donna's car had originally been found. Using dental records, the skeletonized remains were eventually positively identified as belonging to the missing 19-year-old. An autopsy initially determined the cause of death to be a gunshot wound to the head. However, upon further inspection of Donna's remains, it was determined that while a head injury was the cause of her death, it was not definitively from a gunshot wound. Regardless, her death was officially ruled as a homicide. The family hired private investigators, trackers, and even psychics in an effort to find the person responsible, but all to no avail. The case would eventually again grow cold. Then, nearly 40 years later, in 2022, authorities reopened the case, and all viable evidence was resubmitted to the New Jersey State Police Central Regional Laboratory. This included DNA evidence, as well as fingerprints found on scene. In April of 2023, authorities announced that a man named Nathaniel Harvey was responsible for Donna Macho's murder. Identification was made through the semen left in Donna's apartment during the initial 1984 investigation. They determined his DNA was the only DNA evidence in the bedroom that should not have been there. Nathaniel Harvey had a lengthy criminal history. He had actually been a suspect in the case early on in the investigation, but due to lack of evidence and lack of DNA testing abilities, he was never charged. Over the years, Harvey had been arrested for several sexual assaults, as well as for another unrelated murder, which occurred in June of 1985. Irene Schnapps, a 37-year-old widow, had been found dead in the bedroom of her garden apartment. Her body was found by a coworker who went to her home after not hearing from her. Despite no unusual sounds being heard by neighbors, Irene's bedroom showed a gruesome scene, with her body left nude for investigators to find alongside a bloodied bed. Investigators concluded that her head had been struck with a blunt metallic object. A bloody fingerprint was also found on the pillowcase, which had fallen to the floor. With no sign of a forced entry, police believed the attacker may have been someone Irene knew personally. A neighbor of Irene named Peter was initially considered a suspect after it was found he had a romantic interest in the woman. However, he was later cleared. At the time, Nathaniel Harvey entered unlocked houses where he would hold captive and sexually assault young women. He was brought in for questioning, and it was observed that he was wearing a shoe which was of a comparable size to the bloody shoe print discovered at the scene of the crime. Police also found a Seiko watch in Nathaniel's car. Police noted that a Seiko watch was found to be missing from the murdered Irene's apartment. According to police officers, after 3 days of exhaustive questioning, Nathaniel Harvey confessed to sexually assaulting and murdering Irene Schnaps. However, for reasons unknown to the media, this confession was neither recorded nor put in writing. Later, Nathaniel insisted that he actually had nothing to do with the murder. Nevertheless, he was tried and sentenced to death for the death of Irene. During his appeal, Harvey argued that he was not informed of his Miranda rights prior to the police interrogation. As a result, the New Jersey Supreme Court reversed his conviction. In 1994, he was retried and sentenced to death. In 2007, New Jersey abolished the death penalty, and Nathaniel appealed his sentence again. After undergoing several legal proceedings, the case was eventually brought to the state Supreme Court, which mandated the conduct of new DNA testing. In 2015, as a result of the Supreme Court's mandate, Harvey was granted the opportunity to have a third trial for the murder of Irene. However, while he was waiting for the third trial to commence, he died in prison in November of 2020. He maintained his innocence for the Irene Schnaps case until his death. His former attorney said to the media that there was no hard evidence connecting his client to the 1985 murder, saying, quote, "Other than Harvey did a lot of bad things." During the time of her disappearance and her family's time of stress, Harvey had peacefully resided in East Windsor. He had been employed at the farm where Donna's body would eventually be discovered. Donna's sister said to media, quote, "I was relieved it was going to be closed, but so mad. Mad I didn't stay and help her fight. Mad he could invade our home so easily. Mad he was not in jail. Mad he was dead. He never had to pay for this. I'm glad the case is closed and it was him, but I feel like he got away with it." While justice was unable to be served, the case was officially closed after nearly 4 decades. Shelly Ann Werner was a 15-year-old teenager living with her mother, Kathleen Werner, in Mishawaka, Indiana. Shelly was a student at Mishawaka High School. She actively participated in sports and was a member of the school band. On June 16, 1980, Shelly said goodbye to her mother and left to go to Wilt's supermarket. Shelly took her 1973 orange Volkswagen to the market, which was only about 2 miles from her home. Later that day, when she failed to ever return back to her house, her mother notified police. Initially, police treated the case as that of a missing person, possibly a runaway. But when the 15-year-old did not return after 24 hours, investigators changed the case's status to that of a possible abduction. Police went to Wilt's supermarket and questioned employees, who did in fact remember Shelly buying groceries around 1:30 p.m. the prior day. They said that she left the store around 2 p.m. Witnesses recall seeing her getting into her car, which was parked only 50 feet from the entrance of the store. However, as soon as she got into her car, witnesses remembered seeing a man walking to the automobile and pulling open the driver's side door. Those who saw this recall Shelly had a, quote, surprised look on her face. The man boldly sat in the driver's seat while Shelly slid over to the passenger seat. As the man had his back turned to the eyewitnesses, it was impossible to ascertain whether he was carrying a weapon. The 2 occupants of the car then left the parking lot and drove east on Lincoln Way. The man, witnesses recall, seemed to be between 16 and 18 years old. He was around 5 foot 7 inches tall and roughly 130 pounds. Witnesses recall the man had unique features, with medium-length blonde hair and a blonde mustache. Previously, witnesses recall seeing the man loitering in front of the store before abducting Shelly. It was believed that the man had hitchhiked or was dropped off at the store by an acquaintance. A police sketch of the suspect was released to the public. Shelly's car was later found at a Park and Shop store in Osceola, Indiana. There were no indications of a struggle within the vehicle, leading investigators to believe that the perpetrator had abandoned the car at that location and had proceeded to use an alternative mode of transportation to continue his crimes. A massive search ensued for the missing teen, which included helicopters, volunteers, and search dogs. However, no trace of the 15-year-old could be found. 10 days later, 2 girls walking in a wooded area found a decomposing body near an abandoned set of train tracks on Madison Road, around 3 miles south of South Bend. The body was later confirmed to belong to the 15-year-old Shelly Werner. She had been found partially clothed, and her body had been dumped in a ravine. She had been shot twice by a large caliber bullet at close range, once in the head and once in the body. Autopsy reports conclude that the body was believed to have been dumped 7 to 10 days prior to being found. Despite the advanced stage of decomposition of her body, law enforcement presumed that the intention behind the crimes was that of a sexual nature. The police pursued multiple leads and questioned several suspects, but their efforts yielded no results. They even attempted to utilize hypnosis techniques to aid witnesses in recalling any additional details regarding the abduction and murder. Nonetheless, these endeavors did not produce any notable breakthroughs, and the case would eventually go cold. Decades later, a witness who had initially been hesitant to come forward due to concerns of retaliation against their family spoke to police and finally identified 3 individuals linked to Shelly's murder. Detectives investigating the case said the witness was a woman who was intimidated by the suspects, and that it was only when 2 of them died that she felt comfortable talking to police. While 2 of the suspects had passed away, the 3rd had simply disappeared over time. However, this new information prompted detectives to reopen the case. The investigators located additional witnesses to the crime and uncovered more evidence, all of which further corroborated the witness's statement. In the course of their investigation, they also learned that the 3rd suspect, who had previously disappeared, was since deceased as of 2018. In 2023, after analyzing evidence and all the statements gathered, the St. Joseph County Prosecutor's Office deemed the proof against the 3 suspects as conclusive. However, as all 3 suspects were deceased, the authorities could not pursue any criminal charges against them. The police have not released any information, nor have they released the names of the suspects, as charges cannot be filed. However, they said the suspects were about 5 to 10 years older than Shelly, and that Shelly was familiar with the killers but not friends with them. The detective investigating the case said, quote, "The reason that some of these things take so long is because of the fear and threats that some of the suspects put towards witnesses. If they know somebody, they intimidate them, they threaten their families. And that's exactly what happened in this case." While the offending men were never be able to brought to justice, the case was finally considered closed after 43 years. On June 4th, 1981, a partially nude woman's body was found by a construction crew about 7 miles north of New Braunfels, between the northbound access road and I-35. The woman had been choked before being shot 6 times, 1 right above the right eye and 5 times above and behind the right ear. She was believed to be between the ages of 17 to 20 years old, was about 5 foot 3 inches tall, and weighed 118 pounds. The woman was wearing only a multicolored blouse, bra, and white cotton socks. She wore a diamond stud earring in her right ear and a hoop with a green stone in her left. Police believe that she had been killed somewhere else and dumped at the location where she was found. The woman had fought her attacker fiercely, as evidenced by the defensive wounds on her hands. Seemingly, the woman had scratched her attacker during the fight. Police collected evidence from under her fingernails for future testing. There was no identification found on the woman, and as a result, police were unable to identify the victim. There were no weapons found at the crime scene, and no witnesses saw anything suspicious. Despite attempts by investigators to identify her using fingerprints, and despite sharing a composite sketch with local media, their efforts proved unsuccessful. Consequently, the victim was laid to rest under the name Jane Doe. In 2008, while reviewing Jane Doe cases, police discovered that a missing persons case filed in 2007 matched the description of a Jane Doe found back in 1981. The missing person report was for a woman named Carol Joyce DeLeon. Her family was contacted and provided a DNA sample. Soon, a DNA test confirmed that the unidentified teenager found in 1981 was indeed Carol Joyce DeLeon. In 1981, Carol lived in the West Avenue area of San Antonio. She had graduated from Thomas Edison High School on May 28, 1981. Tragically, this would be just days before her murder. Carol had told her family that she would be moving away after turning 18, and initially, her family had simply presumed that she had followed through with her plans. While her family did attempt to make a missing persons report in 1981, after not hearing from Carol, no report was filed as she had turned 18 and had previously told her family members she would be moving away. Moreover, there was no indication of foul play. As the years went by without any communication from Carol, her younger sister finally filed a missing persons report in 2007. To her sister's dismay, the missing persons report yielded new information, and she had to find out from a police officer that her older sister had been killed decades prior. Even though the victim found by construction crews had finally been identified, the perpetrator responsible for her death remained at large. It was believed that on the day before Carol was found deceased, on June 3, 1981, she had visited a nightclub. Authorities conducted an investigation of the nightclub but were unable to locate any witnesses who may have recalled seeing the teenager. In 2010, police created an unknown male DNA profile from the DNA found at the crime scene. The genetic information had been entered into CODIS, however, no match could be found. With no leads nor suspects, the case would again grow cold. Then, 10 years later, in 2020, DNA found at the crime scene was again submitted, this time for genetic genealogy testing, which identified 3 persons of interest. Investigators then collected DNA samples from the 3 individuals and matched it with DNA found at the crime scene. In April of 2023, authorities announced that 68-year-old Larry Allen West was charged with Carol Joyce DeLeon's murder. They said that Larry West's DNA matched that found under the fingernails of Carol, as well as matched the semen found on her body. According to authorities, the likelihood of the DNA found on Carol's body belonging to somebody else was statistically almost impossible. Investigators said, quote, Larry Allen West could not be excluded as the foreign contributor of this DNA profile. The probability of selecting an unrelated person at random who could be the contributor of this foreign DNA profile is approximately 1 in 422.1 quintillion. West was known to frequent bars in Bexar County, looking to pick up specifically women of Hispanic heritage. The killer's first wife told investigators that she had been subjected to numerous sexual assaults and physical abuse during their short-lived 30-day marriage. While Allen West has denied any involvement in Carol's murder, he was arrested in April of 2023, and the judge set a $125,000 bond. Allen was able to post bond and has been released from jail. He is scheduled to be back in court in May of 2023 for a pretrial hearing. Carol's sister said of the case's progress, quote, "We've been suffering for over 40 years, not knowing what happened to my sister. The potential of what she could have been will never be known. We were robbed of that. She was robbed of that." In these uncertain times, our Patreon has been a source of support and morale. Thank you so much for those of you who continue to give, and if you're interested in participating, you can join for as little as $1 a month. Just head to the link in our bio below.